Got my mic adjusted. Want to call the Stillwater Planning Commission meeting of September 17th to order. We'll follow the usual process as we walk through these different items on the agenda. The first item on tonight's agenda, the public hearings, is for Dale Sorrell and Cobalt Homes LLC map amendment.
No, there's an election at the top.
Oh,
Do you want to do that or not?
we can do that. Sorry, I just flew right past that. Okay, first on the agenda, we had the election of a vice chair. Do we have a nomination?
Vicki, do you want to volunteer?
Why is everyone looking at me? Not particularly, no.
If no one wants to volunteer, I'll take it over if you want to have me.
It's up to you.
What you nominate me?
We've served
I
before,
agree.
so it's
I
we would
agree.
we like to have people moving through it if possible.
You haven't served, so
But
it's
if you do
yours
not
if you
wish
want.
to, though, then
Not at this time.
Okay.
Thank you.
So nominate me.
I nominate you for vice chair.
I second Mike Booker for vice chair.
Okay, we have a nomination and a second for Mike as vice chair. We take a formal recorded vote, I assume. Okay, and we have a vote of 4-0. So next meeting?
Next
I'm gonna-
meeting. You
I'm gonna
chair
assume
this
that-
meeting, yes.
I will do that. Okay, now that we have that settled,
There you go.
we'll move on to the first, or the second item on the agenda, the map amendment MA 19-05, requesting review and approval to rezone property addressed as 1199 West Airport Road from residential single-family small lot to commercial general. Staff, you want to make a presentation?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, Ryan Harkins, Community Development. This is a map amendment request for 1199 Airport Road. The applicant is Dale Sorrell from Cobalt Homes. He's represented by Jimmy Hill. The hatched area in question along Airport Road is the subject property. It's a request from RSS to Commercial General. The aerial here gives you a better idea of the subject property. This is looking from the south to the north. The area in purple is the subject property. And at this time, staff is going to defer to the applicant and their agent to come forward and make the rest of the presentation and explain the reasoning behind the rezoning request.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Dale Sorrell. We're wanting to rezone,
Address?
oh, that's okay. 12511 East Lakeview Road, Glencoe.
All right, thank you.
We're wanting to get this frontage rezoned for some commercial use. We don't have any specific purpose in mind right now, but we've talked to some folks with the airport and coming up with some other ideas for the best use. I've worked with Paula Dennison for years coming up with ideas for this, but one idea is there's a couple of people that are interested in office space to run a business out of. So we would appreciate it if you'd consider approving this. Do you have any questions?
Can they put the map up of the area in question? So they want to rezone the entire hatched area,
Correct.
which is the north half of the area they own.
Correct.
Okay, just one. I was just reading through, I was getting confused there. So it's the entire hatched area. So there is a buffer between the structures south of that.
Yes,
That you're not
that
asking for.
part, we want to leave it residential and develop it for some lots later.
Okay, any other questions?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that was the staff portion of the item. Would anyone like to speak in favor of this item other than what has already been expressed? Okay, seeing none, would anyone like to speak in opposition to this item? Please step up to the podium.
Hi, thank you for your time. I'm Stacy Thomas, 1112 West Newman Avenue. So I represent the neighborhood to the south of this property, along with some of my neighbors here in the community. And we would like to express our concern and objection to the rezoning of the property that is on the map. As residents and homeowners in the neighborhood located to the south of this property, we feel rezoning may have several significant negative impacts to our community. The property is currently zoned as residential. The property to the north is residential, as is the property to the south. So rezoning this property creates commercial property in an area that's residential property. And also to the side of that property are apartments, which are also residential. Since no site plan has been filed to indicate how the development may impact the residents in this area, we have concerns as to what might go in and how it may change the structure or feel of our neighborhood. We fear increased traffic in or near our neighborhood, which currently enjoys quiet streets with no through traffic. We worry about increased noise pollution from commercial activity, increased light pollution, and degradation of the quality of our neighborhood, which is not seen in this map here, but in the previous one, you could see our neighborhood to the south. I have with me a letter I would like to share with the commission that is signed by by the residents in the neighborhood located to the south of the area. We appreciate that Mr. Sorrell has the right to develop the property, but with no site plan in place to know what type of development could go in and what potential side effects may happen to our neighborhood, that is why we're here to express our concern. Thank you. And may I give this to you all? Or
Yes.
May I?
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak in opposition to this item? Okay. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing at this time and ask the staff to approach and present the alternatives.
So at the present time, the alternatives that are available to you are to A, find that the request is appropriate and recommend approval of the map amendment. You can recommend denial and find that it is not an appropriate request. You can table the item to a particular date if you feel there's more information needed, or you can approve with conditions if you find it appropriate. Any questions I can answer about the alternatives?
Well, I'll start off with a question. I see that there's a note in the what we were given to read and consider, that this corridor is increasingly becoming commercial and industrial, transitioning to more of a business type corridor, at least along the frontage to Airport Road. Has there been any consideration in the comp plan, land use, to rezone this rather than approaching these individual developments as a special use permit?
At this present time, there has not been any discussion about updating the future land use element of the comp plan or the entire comp plan to reflect those changing patterns on the ground. We do recognize that that's happening and that there's that pressure to do so, to see that type of land use change along the corridor. However, but the answer is no. There hasn't been any discussions at the present time to make those changes.
Okay. What would be a typical buffer for a development like this between commercial activity and residential or apartments?
There's not a set typical standoff distance or a buffer distance. It will vary. Part of it will also vary not only by the distance, but also what you do with that distance. So if they were to put up screening or a tree line, things like that, that could be part of that buffer.
Okay. Have any other questions of staff?
Under this proposed rezoning, how many feet of buffer is there between the south line of this proposed zoning and the north line of this subdivision?
That is unknown because from the south, from the end of the proposed map amendment, the south boundary of that to the south boundary of what the owner currently has, it is roughly 260 feet
Okay.
at its greatest distance.
Any other questions for staff?
At this time, there's not any, with the rezoning to commercial for what he's asking for, there's not going to be any increased traffic in the neighborhood, unless I'm missing something. Is that correct?
There's none proposed, but again, we've not seen a site plan to indicate one way or another. That's not typically a required element of a map amendment application because it's speculative by nature. So again, the short answer is no, not that we know of, because of what we just haven't seen anything to indicate that yet. So if we were to see a site plan, it might indicate something differently. What they've indicated in discussions, the brief discussions with staff so far have been they wish to maintain access off of Airport Road.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. Any discussion about this item among the commissioners?
My conclusion in my mind is that we ought to recommend the City Council approve the map amendment. It's along Airport Road. It has multifamily and commercial zoning already along the road, and it has a 200+ foot buffer between it and the neighborhood to the south. So I'm going to vote for this rezoning.
Any other comments?
I make a motion to accept findings and recommend the City Council approve the proposed map amendment as presented.
I second.
Okay, there's been a motion made and a second. Proceed to a vote. And the motion passes 4-0. Okay. All right, we'll move to the next agenda item. This is Beta Psi of Gamma Phi Beta Incorporated map amendment MA 19-06 requesting review and approval to rezone property addressed as 302 South Walnut Street from residential single-family small lot to residential multifamily intermediate district. Staff?
This is, as you said, a map amendment request for 302 South Walnut. It is a request to go from RSS to RMI in order to facilitate a parking lot. The area map here shows the subject property in the hatched pattern in black. It is literally at the T intersection of 3rd and Walnut. This aerial indicates in purple the subject property. It is near a park and a number of properties within the Greek district and multifamily properties. At the present time, there is a single-family house on it. And to further explain the request and the map amendment proposal, I'm going to ask Kelly Harris from Keystone Engineering, who is the agent for the applicant, to come forward.
Good evening, Kelly Harris with Keystone Engineering, located at 923 South Lowry. So I guess we're trying new formats tonight where you get to hear more from me and less from staff. I don't know if that's a bonus for you or not, but we're going to take a look at my PowerPoint now. As Ryan said, that this area here in this pinkish color is the subject tract. It's at the corner of Walnut and 3rd. You can see it's in RSS zoning district. It abuts the Westwood Overlay District to the west. This is Tower Park, zoned public, and then RMI is directly across the street where some fraternities and sororities and other parking lots are constructed. This other black bold area is the sorority house site. It's within 600 feet of our proposed site here. And then, excuse me, down the way here, you'll see this hatched area. It's RSS PUD, and it currently has a parking lot on it as well. Same map, just with the aerial photo on it. As you can see, they have existing parking lot on their property where they have their sorority house. I'm getting ahead of myself. So this property down here is that RSS PUD property that has the parking lot. So this was several years ago, back when PUDs were allowed for properties less than 1 acre. Since then, the code has changed and we're not allowed to do PUDs for their small tracts. So our only option is to ask for a straight rezoning to a zone classification that allows it. And RMI is the next zoning classification that allows a parking lot. So as background, the sorority house is in the middle of a building expansion as we speak. During that design and expansion, they lost 8 of their existing parking spaces from that parking lot that I showed you previously. So they were lucky enough to find and purchase a piece of property near their home site, which I've estimated could get 13 parking spaces on that site. This would, of course, account for the 8 spaces that they lost during construction, and then provide a few additional, which would reduce the number that they're currently renting from OSU, and then probably parking on-street parking in the neighborhood as well. So the request to RMI, it is the lowest next density zoning district that allows parking lot by right. The property, as I keep mentioning this, it's 600 feet and it's near the property, because if it's within 600 feet, they're allowed to count these parking spaces toward their required parking spaces that they're providing. So that would allow that reduction from OSU renting spaces from them. I believe in your packet, staff mentioned that screening and landscaping is not required in this zoning classification. However, if a parking lot is over 6 spaces, then screening is required, so we would be putting up a screening fence around the property. Landscaping per se, the proposed greenery is not a requirement for this parking lot. However, we would be required to provide a 5-foot grass space between the front property line and where the parking lot starts. So that 5-foot buffer from the property line. And then per the comprehensive plan, this area is designated to be high-density residential, and parking lots are typically associated with those types of development. I believe you have, okay. Tonight, when I got here, I received letters from the neighbors. I skimmed it. It seems like drainage is a concern, the proximity to Westwood Overlay District, tree canopy, and then loss of value in real estate. Again, this is a strict rezoning. We haven't done any design work. We haven't surveyed the property. However, if it does continue and get to that phase, we will be required to do stormwater detention. We won't be allowed to increase any runoff from the property. Currently, the property would drain towards Walnut Street, so anyway, we wouldn't be draining towards the Westwood, towards a neighbor. We drain directly to a street. And again, we would not be increasing that runoff. I would mention that we do abut Westwood Overlay District, but they don't have a buffer around their boundary lines. And so we feel like that we should be able to do this rezoning as it fits in with the developments across the street and some around the area. Do you have any questions for me?
What would your screening consist of to the west?
I'm sorry, what?
What would the screening consist of?
Typically, it's a 6-foot-tall wooden fence.
Okay.
Yep.
And that is maintained or checked on an annual basis, is that correct?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So you're going to have this wooden fence directionally challenged to the west, but to the north and south, you're going to have a wooden fence.
Correct, yes,
So it'd be similar to the one down south.
yes.
How are they gonna come in and out on this? I mean, I know you haven't laid it out, but I mean, I didn't see an alley or anything in the back, so they're gonna pull in and then back out, back to the road kind of
Yes,
thing?
and that's how the parking lots across the street and then to the south both act as well.
They're going to pull in a parking space, they're going to back out of the parking space, but they'll be going forward back into the street. They won't back into the street.
Correct,
Okay, I just wanted to.
if the parking lot's not full. A lot of the sororities have assigned parking spaces that are numbered, so I'm assuming it would be the same way, but I don't know that for sure.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Staff, I have a question before we open it up to the public. When was the parking lot to the south established? We don't.
That I don't know. Lance or Paul might. It's been a while.
It's been approximately 8 years because I voted for that when it went through on the planning commission. So I remember it very well.
Was that prior to the overlay district being established or post overlay district?
It was right after the overlay district was established, is what I remember.
Okay, all right, thank you. Would anyone else like to speak in favor of this map amendment?
Hi, I'm Gabriel Cook. My family and I live at 301 South Orchard, which is the street directly behind where this parking lot's planning on going in. And I just wanted to point out a few things. They mentioned that that this parking lot would be in the middle or in the area of other multi-family residential lots. And this spot that they're talking about between 3rd and 5th is all single family from that 3rd to 5th on that side of the street, not on Orchard, but on the far end of it where this parking lot's going to be going in. It's a concern of my family, living there at 301 Orchard, directly behind.
I didn't want to,
Oh.
sorry, interrupt you, but we're still opening it up for those in favor of the.
I'm sorry. I'm new to this thing here, so
Yeah, I just want to be sure we give everyone the opportunity, so. Okay, does anyone else want to speak in favor of the map amendment? Okay, seeing none, sorry. You want to vote your computer?
We have a process to go through.
Yeah, I understand.
So it's a concern of my family because I have young kids that will be in that backyard directly behind that, what would be a parking lot now. And there's no telling after it's rezoned to a new designation if that would stay a parking lot. And so that's a major concern of mine. Once it gets rezoned to an MRI, it could be something other than a parking lot. And that's just something that I would hope that the committee would consider.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else like to speak in opposition to this map amendment?
Thank you for making time on your agenda to assist us to state our opposition because of the points that have been made earlier in the map that was shown.
Name and address, please.
Brenda Masters, 302 South Orchard, directly next door to the Cooks, directly to the west of the proposed parking lot. The map that was shown is very clear. The Planning Commission has held the boundary as the protection for Westwood. Because when you look at where on the map that was shown previously, where the RMI location is, it's very clear it's down Walnut. When that area was laid out, those houses have only a very narrow strip, a quarter block. There is no alley, and unlike what's been stated that the water runs to the east toward Walnut, I do not think that's true from the floods that have occurred. Water runs south over the 2 blocks from Walnut to Orchard between University and 4th. And every plot of loam soil can take 2 inches an hour of water. Sandy soil, clay soil, even more. This 5-foot drainage behind that was used down south on 4th is completely unacceptable. The backyard behind there has continued to flood over and over. Charlie Moore's house had a foot of water in the garage this summer due to flooding because of that parking lot. We need to question, you know, I know there's not an appropriate legal boundary to protect Westwood Conservation District. We've actually planned, the residents there planned on the Planning Commission to protect us with that narrow strip. But the most important things are, parking lots do not absorb water. And we don't have an inch to spare. Because if you look at the map, what's already RMI, a large percentage of that is already paved. And where does that water go? Well, from about 1 block west of Monroe, it flows toward us, and then the other direction. But we're already taking more water than we were meant to take. Protect the tree canopy, protect Westwood, use the dividing line as Walnut. There's no reason to continue to fold. Thanks for the opportunity to make these comments.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak in opposition to this map amendment?
My name is Thomas Barkley. I live at 14320 East Yost Road in Glencoe, but I also own a house with my wife at 221 South Orchard. I would like to propose that we put off a decision about this rezoning until further work can be done on where the water will go, what exactly is the nature of the Westwood District, and what should the boundary around it be. To the south of us, we've already seen multifamily come in, what happens there is all those fences that we've been talking about and 3-story buildings create huge amounts of shade. And that shade impairs the viability, I think, of that district. And I think it also hurts our property values as the Walnut area develops. So I propose that we delay this decision until further work can be done on that and water. The water problem is real there, and we would like a chance to validate that and bring a study of that to the commission. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else like to speak in opposition to this item? Okay, seeing none, we close the public hearing and have staff present the alternatives.
So at the present time, your alternatives that are available are to A, approve the findings, find that the map request is in order and recommend approval to the Planning Commission. Your next option is to recommend approval with conditions. If you feel that's appropriate, you can recommend denial based on the fact that you feel that the map amendment request is not appropriate at this time. Or if you feel there's additional information needed, you can table the item to a certain date later. Any questions about the alternatives?
Any questions?
Thank you.
No questions. Discussion among the commission members.
Well, I think that the water issue has to be handled insofar as when they do the layout thing. That's a requirement of that. So if we're unable to fulfill the requirements on the water issue, they can't put the parking lot there. So while I understand the issues with regard to it, I think that we have a process for that. I drove down the Walnut Street. It's mostly older student type of rental housing at this point, and it can change and vary. And the people did speak from the Orchard side, but no one from the Walnut side. And so versus a student house versus a parking lot, I'm not feeling a huge difference between those two in terms of noise, in terms of traffic and things of that sort. So they need the parking in that area. We continue to have problems in that area. So I'm at least amenable to the possibility of a parking lot of that house rather than the house that's there. Just my 2 cents.
I agree with you on the drainage issue. The drainage issue will be taken into account when the development occurs, and we already have proper controls over that. My concern, I've always changed my mind 6 times during the presentation. My concern is rezoning it. Anything can be built there they say they're going to build a parking lot. I'm confident they're going to build a parking lot, but then it could change into a multifamily structure or something else in the future, and that's where I have a concern about this. But then again, we limited the possibility of a PUD, so we can't restrict it to a parking lot. And I'm assuming, Mr. Attorney, that I can't rezone it and say the only use that can be used on it is a parking lot. So I cannot do that. So that's why I have a mixed feeling. You know, when the one that was done several years ago, we did a PUD. I knew it was going to be a parking lot. It was close enough to 6th. We had multifamily in that area, and I knew that was changing. This is more up into the neighborhood. And to me, when I drove by today, there were lots of houses north of it and lots of houses south of it. So I thought a parking lot would be out of context with everything that's along the west side of the street. And that's what my thought is.
I have to agree with you on that. Although, if it was rezoned for this now and you worry about a high-rise apartment in the future, they're going to have to come back in here again, correct? Before the planning commission, because they can't build a high-rise structure on that lot. They're going to take in multiple lots, and it would be heard again. But I do understand both sides.
They can build a structure 50 foot tall without coming back.
They could.
I don't know if you consider that high rise or not, but that's pretty tall in the neighborhood.
True.
Pretty out of scale in comparison to the rest of the neighborhood. I agree with Mike. I think this parking lot is deeper into the neighborhood area than the earlier one. It's a very good point. I also think that as we've had a similar issue before us regarding this neighborhood, it's in a fragile state. We're seeing a revitalization of it, which I think is gaining traction. I think having the type of rental housing as a buffer, it's not a traditional buffer, but as a buffer between the Westwood Overlay District and the multifamily, the sororities and fraternities to the east, serves a good purpose. So I am not in favor of a parking lot in this lot. I think it should maintain its residential character, even though that residential character is rental in nature. But I think it does, as I said before, protect the buffer the neighborhood. Someone want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. We find that the map amendment is not an appropriate use for the property based upon the impacts of the surrounding vicinity and do not recommend that the city council approve the map amendment.
I second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. We'll proceed to a vote. Okay, the motion passes 3-1. All right, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a short-term rental, STR-0001, review of application from Julie and Jim Bernard for a short-term rental property at 3014 South Sanger Road in the residential single-family large lot district. Now, I don't know that we have a firmed-up process for reviewing these. There's been some discussion that we perhaps allow anyone that want to speak in opposition to this, and then the person, Paula, please.
Good evening, Paula Dennison, Assistant City Manager. This is brand new to the Planning Commission. Just a little background right quickly. The City Council did adopt an ordinance establishing the licensing requirement for short-term rentals in 3 zoning districts inside city limits. The residential single-family large lot, RSL, residential single-family small lot, RSS, and the residential 2-family, the RT districts. Those are the only 3 districts that require the licensing, primarily because the short-term rental use is considered a commercial use, and you've got it in those 3 1 or 2 family residential districts. Part of the...
Define to me what short-term rental means.
Thank you. Short-term rental is the rental of all or a portion of a property for a period of time less than 30 days.
Now, this property has to be owner occupied.
No, it does not. The owner is the one that can rent the property, but it could be a subsequent property that they have and they live in another house here in town or elsewhere.
Okay.
So part of the licensing of the short-term rentals in Stillwater is the notice that we send out, the city sends out to all of the owners of property within 300 feet similar to statutory requirement notices on other land use items like a rezoning, a PUD, a specific use permit. We send notice out advising the property owners that there is an application for a short-term rental. We provide them the map location, the address, and who the applicant is. They have the opportunity, any of those owners has the opportunity to object to that short-term rental application and the city issuing the license. The objection must occur within a certain time period, and when an objection is filed, it comes before the Planning Commission. So that's why you're seeing these tonight. The criteria by which the Planning Commission is to hear the applicant and their reasoning and rationale for wanting to establish a short-term rental, as well as the individuals that have filed an appeal to the licensing of that. You'll hear from both parties. The burden is on both of them to present their cases to you. This is evaluated similar to a specific use permit. We had included that code section in with the memo from me. That lists out the more the impact to the neighborhood criteria that typically y'all and the city council would evaluate of any specific use permit. Those criteria, and I'll just go through a couple of them right quickly, and this is not all inclusive. Open space areas, setbacks, lighting, signage, landscaping, parking, density, those are the criteria, and it is provided for you in the Stillwater City Code, Chapter 23, which is the Land Development Code, Section 23-180. So procedure-wise, the applicant will be approaching the Planning Commission to explain their reason and their request for this short-term rental. And then the individual or group that filed the appeal will come and they will convey to you the impacts that they see to their neighborhood, to their property, whatever their reasons for objection were in filing the appeal on the short-term rental. Then the Planning Commission will take the SUP criteria and ask either party any question that you need. Staff is not involved in this. Y'all did not have a report from us. You don't have a recommendation from us. This is solely a licensing and appeal, almost a hearing from the two parties before the Planning Commission. Any questions? That was a long-winded explanation, but.
So are you saying that only the person or persons who have made the objection can come up and speak against the situation or the request?
That would be primary. The reason is because they are the ones that actually filed that written objection. If they get up here and say, we had a discussion at the neighborhood and I'm representing all of them, yes.
Someone else, some different person or something like that wouldn't be able to do an objection after the individual, only the person that's objected or group thereof.
We would have expected individual separate objections, written objections to have been filed.
My second question was more of a legal question. One of the issues that has come up in this was to say that if they have a homeowners association or a homeowners agreement that does not allow commercial development, is that something binding on this or that affects this that can bind that or not?
No, it's not. That is strictly a civil matter between the homeowner association and property owner.
Okay.
The planning commission could take notice of it, but it's not grounds for you to take any action.
Okay.
It's strictly outside of what you're doing.
That would be that's a civil issue that might have to occur. If something were to happen, they could then do through code of civil court and all that. That's the remedy in that regard through the homeowners association. Okay. Thank you. All right. Thank you.
Anything else from me?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so the process starts out with presenting an area map. Am I looking at the correct process? No.
No, the person.
But
for
why don't we
it
have the
comes up.
applicant
Applicant comes
come
up
up
and tells
first?
us what they want to do.
Okay, and then
Opposition.
the
speaks after.
opposition who have filed a written protest. Okay, so we have the person who is making the application for this.
Jim Bernard. I live at 3010 South Sanger, and my application is in, it's complete, and has been accepted. I find it very difficult for me to give you any information because I don't know what the objection is from my neighbor other than he just doesn't want it. So
Why don't you tell me how you plan to use this facility as a short-term rental?
Well,
property?
short-term rental, and I'm also in the hotel business, so I have a little bit of both directions, is, as Paula said, anything under 30 days. We have been using our location, it's 3014 South Sanger. It's behind our home. We purchased it from the folks that built it that were relatives of ours because they're moving to Edmond. We purchased it and we have been operating it already for over a year as a short-term rental because there was no licensing up until that point, till now. We are licensed 0001 application, so we are the guinea pigs, and here we are. We are on VRBO and Airbnb. If you're familiar with that, I don't know if any of you traveled with VRBO or any of that. Okay, so I don't need to explain all that.
No.
People make reservations. My wife is the one that really runs it. She cleans the house. It's a gorgeous property. We have a lot invested. We've not had any problems whatsoever in the year that we've been running it as a short-term rental. That's how we would operate it. But I'd like to be able to come back and speak to the objections.
I'm in favor of that.
No, I think that's
Yes.
appropriate.
Okay.
I just have a question.
Sure.
Have you had any, you said you've been using it in this manner and structure?
We've actually, and this all began, Paul didn't quite say that, is that it wanted visit Stillwater, and everybody wanted an equal ground with the hotels. We also collect the lodger's tax. So we began collecting the lodger's tax long before. It's not required now until I think October 1. We started last year knowing that this was coming. But go ahead, what was your answer?
I was going to ask if you'd had any complaints prior to
Not a
this
single
time.
one.
Okay.
Not a single one. If there were any complaints, it would be coming from my wife for the people and how they left the house, and she hasn't had any.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'd like to have whoever is protesting this application to approach and speak.
I'm Dr. Anthony Burrell. The address is 64 Yellow Brick to the direct west of this place that's being used. I have concerns. I've been there for 20 years and a couple months. So I have concerns, serious concerns on several issues. The privacy of my home and the constant traffic, transient traffic that I actually even notice now. Okay, I just didn't say anything because I'm busy and I'm not a complainer. But if it gets rezoned, that rezoning can take 73 different people at 5 days a shot. 73. If we shorten that, that means it's going to be more transient group of people in 1 year. In 30 days, it comes to 12 people. I think that's too much. My house is on the cul-de-sac. It's really clear where it is. You know, I didn't put it there. I just bought it. Okay. I'm concerned about the security of the transient people. I'm concerned about the impact on the resale or the value of the apartment once that area becomes multi-use like that. Somebody who wants to live in that cul-de-sac where I am will not be happy with my beautiful yard having that kind of traffic, especially at football games. I mean, I see it all the time. And in fact, by the way, across Sanger to the east, there's something there just across Sanger on the east side. Directly east of me is a swimming pool or lake, slide, and I hear they doing their thing all the time from across the street. So I know if things happen closer, which is, I don't know how many feet, 400 feet from me, property line, I'm sure they're going to hear. So I'm concerned about the resale, the impact on that. I'm also concerned about the mixed usage and how that will impact somebody if I want to sell that house, my house, in a negative way. The drive traffic, I can see the drive traffic. I mean, I put a fence up because, you know, the guy before him didn't talk to me about it, sort of, so we couldn't find a remedy. So I had to do what I thought was best for me. I'm concerned about the, you know, just the extra presence of traffic and the fact that I'm on a cul-de-sac beautifully placed, and then on the back end I'll have all that commercial movement. For starters, what we're saying, and who knows what after that. So that's my concern.
There's just one clarification I would like to make, and perhaps maybe staff ought to clarify this, but as I understand it, this is not a rezoning. This is not a change in the current land use. Just to clarify that.
Okay, I don't have any question about that. I know that 70 people, different people in there that don't own it. Whatever wording we want to use, that's fine. That's way too much for me buying a house where only I live there 365 days a year, or nobody, versus 70 different people who have nothing in stake at it. So whatever terminology, I don't mean to insult anybody or reach past the proper verbiage. With 70 people, that's way out of line. Transient people.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
The applicant, please approach.
First of all, if I had 70 people in there, my wife would probably divorce me. She wouldn't clean the house that many times. But to give you an idea of and I don't have any pretty PowerPoints or anything, but I have pictures. This is a picture of the house. And this is also a picture of the map. These are the 300-foot zone. As you can see, with a large lot, that we've ventured out a long, long ways to different areas. Tony's house from our house, the house that's in question, is 177 feet from the house. If this house doesn't qualify for a short-term rental, you won't have one in this town. I mean, maybe that's the way you want to go, but a lot of your houses you're going to get are 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 feet. Ours is 171 feet. My house is closer than that to this house. I'm 160 feet. I am not at all worried about, I have a house that's 4,800 square feet that sits right next to this house. In fact, I have a bridge over the lake to this house. This is a picture of Tony's house facing our house. It's in question. Can't see it. It's impossible. Unless he went up to the top of his house, the second floor, with binoculars, could he even see our house. This is the drive. You don't drive by Tony's house to get to our house. You drive off Sanger by my house. See, this is where I drove around. That's a private drive to his house, to our house. This is the lake house that is in question as far as we're going to use for short-term rental. Tony's house is back over here, 177 feet away. This is the fence that Tony has erected many, many years ago because he didn't like the resident that was already living in the house. It's impossible. I can't see his house. I don't know how he can see mine. 177 feet away. This is another one. Oops, I'm sorry.
And the entrance to the one you're renting is off of Sanger. It's not through
Right. It has nothing
Sanger
to
Ridge.
do with coming in off Yellow Brick. Nobody goes up on Yellow Brick. There'll be no traffic in front of his house whatsoever. Traffic is in front of my house. And there's one car, two at most. The house is only a two-bedroom house. My wife only allows it up to 6 people to stay there, no more. We don't allow parties. You can see it on VRBO. We have a large amount of money invested in this house and do not want it destroyed by parties or rabble-rousers on a football weekend. We're very careful about who comes. The minimum length of stay in our house is at least 3 days. So if you want to come for one night, you can't stay there. I can't answer his objections other than it is the epitome of what your short-term rental is going to be in this town. It's number one on VRBO. They rank all different categories. It's the number one rented. It's the number one with guest satisfaction, has all 5 stars constantly. It's a beautiful residence.
Any questions for the applicant? No? Okay,
Thank you for your time.
I think we ought to recognize Tony again.
Tony, you want to approach?
To respond to his comments, let's make it clear. I can see his house from my house, number one. Number two, I can hear his parties.
Speak to
I can hear his parties all the time. I never say anything because it just necessarily wasn't worth it. That house, his house, I don't know how many feet, but the one that's next to mine, I will definitely hear what's going on there. And I also see the drive traffic. That's right, they come off of Sanger, their own driveway, but I see the drive traffic from the east side of my house. Okay, so I see his house. I hear his parties way over there. I hear the party across the street that's even further. So I'm sure I will hear what's going on right next to me. There's no question about it. And the defense I brought was because the guy before him was unable to come and talk to me about what was going on, and he put a structure somewhat in my backyard. I don't have pictures to prove that, but it's there. He put a structure right, for me to annoy me. I tried to put trees up, but it wouldn't work because the ground wouldn't take. That's why the fence went up, okay? Because the person, I don't know about him, the person wouldn't come talk to me. And also, there have been people trespassing in my backyard because there's no hard guidelines. Because there's no hard, but there have been people fishing in my yard, et cetera, and then they could, that kind of thing. So I don't complain because that's not my style, but this is a way much, I think. And if it's a 3-day minimum, that means 100 people. 100 different families can come through there. 100 a year. So I strongly disagree. And neighbors, I guess they just kind of didn't want to come and be on the record, but they're not necessarily happy either.
All right, thank you. Any discussion about this item?
I move the application for residential short-term rental be approved.
Second.
Okay, there's been a motion and a second. And that has been approved 4-0. Okay, we'll move to the next item on the agenda, which is another short-term rental, STR 0008, review of application from AMW Properties LLC for a short-term rental property at 2117 East Crestwood Drive in the residential single-family small lot with planned unit development, RSS PUD district. Would the applicant like to approach?
Thank you for your time, Commissioners. My name is Mark Weiser, 223 North Old Highway 51, Stillwater, representing AMW Properties. I'm Ms. Helton, I'm sure, has specific objections to this, but I guess I'll address those after she gives us the details of what those are. I did request a copy of the written complaint in advance, so I generally know what those are. But instead, I'll wait till we hear what those are with more specifics, and instead address what I understand by ordinance upon which these are actually granted or denied, and that is the ability to locate next to less intensive uses. This area is 70% non-owner occupied, and I actually have a This area is 70% non-owner occupied, which does include some lots that have not yet been developed. Those are at the top of your map. If we look at only the occupied lots, 49.6% of them, of occupied lots, are actually non-owner occupied already. So the change in having a different type of tenancy will be very minimal. In fact, the reason why we got into short-term rentals as opposed to long-term rentals is our experience with long-term rentals in this town. It was difficult to compel residents to keep and maintain the properties, particularly external properties, which results in complaints from neighbors and so on. Difficult to control activities and noise that might impact neighbors, and difficult and very time-consuming to remove a long-term tenant if a problem does arise. Based on our experience, we actually believe that many of the long-term rentals in this town are actually more intense than at least the way we operate a short-term rental. We maintain the property ourselves or hire others to do that, supervised by us. We literally know within a day or so of someone leaving if a light bulb is burned out, and then we change it. We impose on our tenants all of the requirements of the homeowners association, and we will follow those and we will require that our tenants follow those. We actually include those, at least the major points of that homeowners association policies are in our listing. I've just provided a copy and paste. That's the way it's been posted, but I thought that might highlight that we do impose, actually the homeowners association guidelines require that tenants be subject to the same guidelines as a owner occupied would be. So in fact, we do that. And then we also impose additional requirements, no parties, additional parking restrictions over and above what's required by the homeowners association. Frankly, our success is based on feedback of tenants registered with Airbnb. In the last more than 200 ratings, our average was 4.8 out of 5. And more importantly, in terms of intensive use, unlike many opportunities to rent to tenants, prospective tenants are also rated, and we have the right under Airbnb terms of service to not rent to someone who would like to rent the property based on feedback of prior landlords from which they have rented. And so if somebody has, been particularly noisy, offended neighbors, we reject them. Let's see, we conduct transactions online and away from properties. In fact, they don't even know the address of the property until after all of those business transactions have taken place, and the only thing left is actually the occupancy portion of the tenancy. And in fact, tenants are specifically allowed by the homeowners association bylaws. We personally drive by each property multiple times every week. And in fact, we communicate with the nearby neighbors and provide our cell numbers to call at any point in time should there be any issue. And then we are able to typically immediately address that. So in terms of the overriding guidelines, this is an extremely low impact, and as I said, I would argue a lower impact than at least with our experience. Maybe we're not doing it right, but at least our experience with long-term rentals in this type of town with these demographics. So I'd like to come back after I hear her specific objections. I'd like to come back up and address those. But does anybody have any questions about impact or process or anything like that? Okay.
So thank you.
Thanks. And someone left a pair of glasses. So. Okay.
Picture.
I love the pen too, it looks like.
Someone like to speak in opposition to this?
Hello, my name is Randy Helton. I'm the president of the Crestwood Association's HOA. I've been asked to speak on behalf of a number of people. So, I'm sorry, 2202 Crestwood Drive. I only said it like 20 times in my head. Okay, a comment made just before this part started, I find very upsetting in the concept of that if we have HOA rules and regulations, bylaws drawn up by an attorney that have been enforced and honored since 1984, and now all of a sudden this person can come in and blow them off. That just doesn't make sense to me because we cannot afford to take this to a civil court and fight it. We have very specifically in the Homeowners Association, in all the bylaws, in the original 1984 ones, we have a statement about how absolutely no commercial businesses can be conducted within our subdivision. Now, if you have a private office that does not create traffic, we all have private offices, whether we have a business or not. That's okay. But in this particular neighborhood, commercial business is not allowed, and it's been that way, like I said, since 1984. We have worked hard to keep it that way. We have worked hard to keep our subdivision getting better and better. Yes, Crestwood was a victim of the crash, the first one, back in mid-'80s, and many people who had just bought their very first time home suffered a lot of lost jobs, et cetera, and so forth. They could not afford to sell their house because it was worth anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000 less than what they had just paid for it. We then helped by making sure, as the community, 50% of us, trying to help the renters understand. I even go door to door with new renters and every year with a complete copy of a normal languaged, not lawyer talk, sorry, they're hard for people to understand, with the definition of all our homeowners association rules. Our biggest ones are speeding. 3 cars per household is allowed to park, and they have to park a very specific way. And this was all done in the 2016 addition to our amendments. We also allow no more than 3 unrelated people to rent a house. And all our landlords have been following these rules to great details. Most of them take good care of their properties. Every neighborhood has a person that gets a little behind on mowing the yard, but other than that, we have been working really, really hard. Now, all of a sudden, I'm hearing that it doesn't matter if we ask these rules to be maintained. It's not something that influences you all. I have a copy of all of it. I can quote you exactly where they're located, when it was done, et cetera, and so forth. But the bottom line is no commercial business in a home in Crestwood. And then also with the fact that in 2016, when we filed our newer edition, prohibits no more than 3 unrelated people from sharing a home in Crestwood. This helps us control the rental property. It helps us control the neighborhood, and our neighborhood is getting better and better, and finally our property values are starting to go up. I have heard nothing but complaints about the concept of putting an Airbnb in as far as additional people in the subdivision, and I also have found a couple other concerns about the concept of this is the fact, okay, where is it? Where did you go? The gentleman is a big talker, but does not follow through with the information shared with me. He tells me by a specific day that he's going to have all the sod done. And we're 2 weeks past the second date that he's given us. We have a mudslide that happens because he had drainage problems. He put in a drainage ditch that just dumps out into a pile of mud about 4 feet in on the lot, and we have mud going down for 2 blocks. We want to make sure that if an individual is allowed to do this, that they do take good care of the property. The lawn needs to be mowed. He says he's going to go by it every 2 or 3 times every week. Well, then why does the lawn need to be mowed? Why is the sod not in yet? Why did it take so long with the construction that was supposed to take a few days? I realize he got victimized. He didn't have a great contractor. But the point is that this gentleman makes lots of promises to our subdivision and is not real convincing in carrying them out. We hope that Crestwood Homeowners Association has the right to utilize our amendments and protect our community. That's all I can say about it. Thank you.
I have a question for you, ma'am.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem. I'm having a hard time understanding. So you have a renters move in for 10 or 12 months.
Right.
And to me, this is renters moving in for 3 or 4 days. And they're going to adhere to all your other requirements, the homeowner association. What's the difference?
What I'm finding is, like he said, he goes by quite a few times every week, but yet it's not even being taken care of now. That's part of my concern. The other situation, this particular house has a very difficult driveway. It's very steep and very short, but it passed way back when. So we only allow 3 vehicles, no matter why. We do have overflow parking, but boy, you know, if you're not there, how can you tell them that they need to belong or go, oh, we're just going to be there for a couple of hours. No, you're not there for a couple of hours. I don't want to have to police the house. I am concerned because when we do have, and we have a lot of families that are renters, when we do have a longer term renter, they get in the habits of following the rules. They're there for 3 or 4 days. Well, you know, we're going to be gone. What difference does it make? And those kinds of things happen all the time. So with having a lack of a consistent family or individuals, even college students, have done outstanding with this situation. And they learn and they adapt and they follow the rules. But if you're only there for 3 days, why would you care? That's what I'm concerned with. And I'm sorry, I've seen too much of that in many different situations. Anybody else?
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Another person, excuse me, we have another person who'd like to speak. In opposition?
My name is Robert Estes, live in 2122 Crestwood. I just wanted to make a comment that you mentioned you give... Okay, sorry. He's made a comment that he gives neighbors cell phone numbers and contact information. I live in 2122. This is directly across the street and one house up, and I have not received any of that information. So again, echoing our HOA president, what he says and what he does are not the same thing.
No question.
Thank you. Okay, the applicant.
On that last point, this is not being used as a short-term rental property yet. We currently have at least for 31 days because we don't have a permit to lease it, and we weren't, by the time this ordinance was passed, we were under contract, but we didn't purchase it until after the ordinance was passed, so we didn't feel like it was appropriate to start an activity that was prohibited by ordinance. All right, so the current tenants are in there for 31 days on a under Landlord Tenant Act. The last time the property was mowed was actually not this past weekend, but the weekend prior, so 8-9 days. We do maintain it well. We did have some problems with drainage. The common area that's to be maintained by the homeowners association that's behind the house drains right into the backyard of the house, which caused a lot of structural damage from the house. We had a contractor, it took them far longer than we anticipated in order to redirect that water through multiple French drains, 2 French drains around both sides of the house to the front of the house. The tenants that were in there preferred that we waited until after they leave soon, I think it's next week, before we actually, we're not going to sod it, we're actually going to seed it. So we're waiting, since they have occupancy of the house, until they leave, since it's only a couple weeks away. But that was all water that was off of the common area that we're now moving to the street instead of having a pond in the backyard. So the specific issues were a prohibition of commercial activities, and it is true that the 84 covenants do restrict that, but they also expressly allow any owner to delegate their rights, including rights of the common areas, to tenants, which is any person who occupies land or property from a landlord, which this clearly is. It's just there's really very little difference with the exception of taxation between a 29-day rental and a 31-day rental. I believe the concern arose out of including it for tax purposes under the hotel ordinance 3434. But I don't know that for sure, but it doesn't change the nature of the activity. And in fact, 3435 defines it as a short-term rental with a definition that exactly meets the criteria of tenant, which is allowed under the corrected covenants. Other businesses operate in the area. I realize that doesn't make this business correct, but as she stated, people have offices there. In fact, Ms. Helton, her primary business address is 2 houses from our property, and that type of business is not allowed under the covenants. But I agree, it's not really a problem. Although our use is allowed under the covenants, other commercial uses are not. In fact, one of the longest listed Airbnb users hosts in Stillwater, their first Airbnb was at 2218 Post Oak Drive, which is in Crestwood. It's no longer being operated. It was operated until less than 2 years ago as a short-term tenancy. And in fact, that person was on the board of directors of the Homeowners Association. She was going to come here tonight, but all we could get was a text that says there's nothing in the covenants that prohibits short-term rentals, and that's from a board member that was in place. As far as 3 unrelated people, we completely agree. You see that we put that in our listing, that's not allowed. We also impose on the tenants that they can't conduct commercial activity while they're in that, because that's required by the bylaws. However, it's our position, and I think it's really clear in the declarations, that the change to prohibit more than 3 required a vote of 75% of the landowners, and only 58% were in favor of it. So it's actually moot, as is the vehicle restriction that was also passed by only 58, and that particular section required a 75% passage rate. So both those are moot with respect to this proceeding. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
We can kind of back in a little bit.
Sure.
Item on the agenda is your application, and you're kind of diverting off into areas.
Oh, I will. I was trying to address. She had her exact complaints in her issue were no more than 3 people. We agree with it. However, it actually isn't a declaration that's enforced because it wasn't done per the declarations. Okay.
Outside the purview of
Okay.
the agenda.
Okay. So in terms, I guess I've really already covered the impacts. The impacts are very minimal. The house is greatly improved over what it was when it was a long-term rental. We actually have 4 other properties that have been short-term rentals for quite a long period. Actually, the only complaint we have had from a neighbor turned out to be. Oh, well, I was talking about in terms of intensity and complaints and other things. But that's true. This property has never been a short-term rental.
Any questions for the applicant?
They brought up one other complaint, and that was the dirt going off the property.
Right.
Did that occur?
We had a French drain installed that was just finished about, actually it was finished, they didn't finish it until after the current tenants had occupancy of the property. We actually asked those tenants, would you like us to seed it right away, or would you rather us not be there with a rototiller and other things? And they preferred that we do it after they departed. So we'll be doing that probably not this weekend because they leave during next week.
I have lots of experience in this area, and you should not have done that. You're in clear violation of all city ordinances by not seeding that. And it's going to be raining this weekend, so I highly recommend you do something in terms of erosion control, because now you're on notice, and the city's on notice that you're in violation of the ordinances. But
yeah, let me clarify. We had a French drain put in. There's an extreme drainage problem.
But you got dirt that's going in the street, and that is a violation of the city ordinance.
Okay, we will address that. The French drain, for whatever reason, the contractor who we have cut ties with stopped the French drain about 4 feet from the street, and it was supposed to drain out, move water from the common area to the common area of the street.
I've made my point,
and I will address that very quickly.
Anything else? Any other questions?
This maybe doesn't matter, but I notice on your sheet you have that no more than 3 unrelated people.
That's correct.
I mean, whether you think it should be looked at because only 58% voted for it, doesn't matter, it's written. How do you vet your people? How do you confirm that there are no more than 3 unrelated people there?
Well, the same way with a long-term lease, we put that requirement in the listing when they actually book a place. Now, again, this hasn't been used as a short-term rental, but any of the requirements that we place on any property, as soon as they book, we respond with those requirements. Whether that's normally it's number of total people. In this case, we largely, for parking concerns, we see the benefit of no more than 3 unrelated people, so we would include that. Clearly, we're not in their house, just like all we can do is include it in the agreement, and then deal with complaints just like a long-term rental. There's very little we can do to address that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
There wants to be a rebuttal to the rebuttal.
The amendments, where they're at, what page numbers, et cetera.
I'm sorry.
I'll go back over here.
So they can get the recording.
I did prepare a copy of the amendments, both the ones that were filed in 1984 and then in 2016. We followed the designated rules of this particular HOA on voting. We accomplished it correctly. It was done by an attorney. It was filed by an attorney, so none of this is moot. Also, I was told and watched when the first contractor kind of didn't finish the job. Mark told me he was going to do it himself. And the French drain it's a large tube about this big with no cover on it, dumping about 5 feet back from the property line. And it's just completely surrounded with mud. It's mud all the way to the backyard, and the full backyard almost is nothing but mud. I don't know. I've always been shown that you have to put a cap on one of those, if nothing else, so creatures don't live in it. And it was a unique product that he utilized. But I do know that I'm concerned about this weekend if we do get the rain. Seeding it is not going to work in front of the French drain because all it takes is one rainstorm and the seeding is going to go far, far away. It's just going to wash down the street. So I do hope that, that we can come to an agreement on that. Also, he has shared with me a number of times he did not care if you all approved this or not because all he had to do was write a lease for 31 days and then he would be fine and he would not have to pay the extra taxes. And then I want to know if he has that type of attitude and he writes a lease for 31 days, though the people are only there for a week, can then he I'm not saying release, but release it during that same period of time with another group of people? That's just something that just didn't hit me the right way. So I'm hoping that we can find a way to avoid having an Airbnb in Crestwood. We've had a lot of problems. It's been a very suffering little subdivision, and we're finally getting our act together, and we really don't need a lot of extra issues in this situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak? Okay, we'll close the public hearing and open it for discussion amongst the commissioners.
If we deny this application, when can the applicant reapply? Is there a time frame?
You can apply tomorrow. That's not an issue.
I mean, driving around in the thing, these are really little lots. I mean, it's literally 2 feet around all there. I mean, we are talking small, when it says small lot, this is small lots. And so I can understand some of the concerns about, people, but at the same time, they already let people let places in there as it is longer. So I don't know, but I was surprised at how small they were. And there's no garage in this one because it's been converted there too. So it's just driveway and that's it.
I think my concern or my confusion is because I didn't realize there was anyone other than the Westwood overlay that could not have more than 3 unrelated people. I didn't realize Crestwood had adopted that. With that and written into their covenants, no commercial businesses can be in there. Doesn't the HOA trump anything that we do here? And if that's the case, why is it here before us? That's my question.
HOA covenants are enforced differently. They're enforced without
Without city, I know that.
And that's not the city's standards. That's just
Right.
That's the way the law's set up in this country.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
If I may, just a point of clarification. The restriction on the number of unrelated persons in Westwood overlay, that is actually city code. So the city adopted that overlay as part of the zoning, and that was a restriction in that overlay. This is different because it is the private covenant. And like Mr. Attorney said, the city enforces their codes very differently than private does because our codes have the criminal penalties, the fines, and are also authorized by state law. Does that help a little?
It does.
Okay.
All right, thank you. So is there some consideration of denying this and then having the applicant meeting certain conditions and then reapplying for this?
I've heard a lot tonight. My concern is the applicant not taking care of a stormwater earth issue for a while. Whether he mowed the yard or not, I don't know for a fact about that, but that's what really concerns me. He has adopted all the other things in the covenants, so that makes me lean towards accepting this, but that one issue leads me to believe that he's not going to maintain the property, and therefore, because of that, I want to turn him down.
Any comment on Mike's comment?
I think that that at least the homeowners association, at least there seems to be a sense that they're trying to contain the character of the neighborhood in some way. And I'm reasonably amenable to the sense that they they seem to be doing things. It's not an organization that was moribund, that didn't do anything at all, and all of a sudden, well, here's this thing. I mean, they are trying something here. So, I mean, in that regard, insofar as if they represent the other members of the community in that neighborhood, I'm a little amenable, especially insofar as that part of our requirement is that the effects of the use upon the character of the neighborhood may be considered. And I think at least there's some semblance. I haven't heard nothing which takes away from the fact that at least they're trying something in their neighborhood. And so in that regard, I'm a little bit leaning against it in that regard, just because there does seem to be that. But at the same time, as Mike said, I mean, I think your point is he is trying to follow at least the same type of requirements they impose upon everybody else in the neighborhood. So, and I think more broadly, my broader issue is that I don't feel like the Planning Commission is the place to resolve neighbor problems. I mean, you know, different people own properties, and in both cases tonight, we've had, I mean, I just feel like I'm in a tough position there. So I think that in that regard, I'm going to look to the broader organization to see how they're doing things, and that's the homeowners group, and they seem to feel like they're against this. And so I'm leaning against it in that way.
I make a motion that this license be denied.
Second.
Do we have a motion and a second? And we have a vote of 4 in favor of the motion. All right, we'll move to the next items on our agenda, which is consideration of our meeting summary or minutes of the August 20th and September 10th meeting.
I move that both minutes be approved.
Second.
Motion and a second. And that motion's been approved 4-0. Okay, do we have any announcements that anyone would like to make?
Well, I just, again, to staff, I mean, I think that is one of these things that as we have evaluated this, as this process gets shaken out, I mean, I think that this is, anything we can do to make this a little bit easier in terms of us being able to make these decisions is going to be helpful versus just letting, you know what I mean? If there's anything that development staff can do to help us in that process to get a better handle on it so that we can make some determination, at least in a reasonable way, it will be.
It's going to happen again.
Well, I mean, yeah, clearly we're going to get more of these and.
We just don't have a clear guideline.
It's hard to get a sense of how exactly we can, we may be so lucky to have somebody with some experience in some of these matters, but I mean, I just feel like at some point it's a little bit awkward too. And legal issues and property owning and this kind of stuff is just like, it's a lot different than RSS, RSM, and this, and here's a zone, and how big is the building kind of a thing, so.
It's easy to get into the weeds, it seems like,
Yeah.
and get
And we
off
can't
track.
adjudicate any of it
Right.
anyway, in that regard. So anyway, that was my comment for staff.
No, that's a good comment. We don't want neighborhood disputes to bleed into considerations of the planning commission, but where's that differentiation in this short-term rental? We don't know, so. Okay, any other comments? Any other announcements? All right, next planning commission meeting is October 1st. We have a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. And that passes 4-0. Thank you.